for those who wish to drift into the deep past, where memory becomes myth and myth becomes sleep. Welcome to the quiet side of history. Find a comfortable spot and clear your mind. Tonight, we are opening a very old, very dusty scroll, from the caves of the ancients to the maps of the Romans. This is the boring lore of the dragon. In the beginning, there was water. Not the water of rivers or rain, but water as an idea. Dark, formless, infinite. It moved without wind. It breathed without lungs. And in that water, coiled in the depths where light had never reached, something vast and ancient stirred. The people who lived 10,000 years ago did not have a word for dragon. They had words for snake, for storm, for the thing that moved in the tall grass when the sun went down. They had words for terror that had no face, for the cold that crept up from the marshes, for the way the earth sometimes trembled and split open as if something beneath were trying to rise. They carved images into stone, long serpentine bodies with no legs, no wings, only coils that went on forever. These were not animals. They were the shape of chaos itself. In Babylon, they called her Tiamat. She was salt water, the bitter sea, the mother of all things. Her body was so large that when she moved, the oceans moved with her. Her scales were not scales, but the surface of the deep itself, black and reflective, holding the stars. She had no need for wings. She was older than the sky. The priests told stories of her death, how the young god Marduk split her body in half, how he used one half to make the heavens and the other to make the earth. But before that death, there was only Tiamat, coiled in the dark, breathing slowly, her great eye opening and closing with the rhythm of tides. She was not evil, she simply was. In Egypt, they knew the serpent by another name, Apophis. He lived in the underworld, in the place beneath the desert where the sun traveled each night. He was chaos, uncreation, the force that wanted to swallow the light and return the world to the void. Every night he rose up to devour Ra, the sun god. Every night he failed, but he would try again and again, forever. The Egyptians painted him on tomb walls, long and red with no limbs, his body stretching across the darkness like a river of blood. His mouth was always open, his eye never blinked. In the frozen north, where the ice groaned and the sea was black, they spoke of Jormungandr, the world serpent, the child of Loki, so large that he encircled the entire earth, his tail in his mouth, holding the world together by the tension of his coils. The Vikings believed that if he ever let go, if he ever stopped biting his own tail, the world would end. They said his body rested on the ocean floor, in the trenches so deep that no light reached them. They said that when he shifted in his sleep, earthquakes shook the land. They said his venom was so potent that it poisoned the sea itself, turning the water black and bitter. He was not a creature to be slain. He was a fact of existence, like gravity, like time. These were the first dragons, though they did not yet have that name. They were the serpents of the deep, the embodiment of water and darkness and the unknown. They were the chaos that existed before order, the night before the first morning. And they slept, coiled in the dark, their great eyes opening and closing, marking time in a world that did not yet count years. Centuries passed. The world grew older. Humans learned to plant seeds, to build walls, to write their fears into symbols that could be read and remembered. the serpents of chaos did not vanish, but they changed. They took on new forms, new meanings. In China, the dragon rose from the water and became something else. They called it Lung, the dragon of the east, and it was not a monster. It was a spirit of order, a bringer of rain, a servant of heaven. Where the serpents of Babylon and Egypt had represented chaos, the Lung represented balance. It did not seek to destroy the world, it sought to sustain it. The emperors claimed descent from dragons. They wore robes embroidered with golden dragon coils, each scale stitched with silk thread so fine it seemed to shimmer in candlelight. The dragon was the empire itself, vast, ancient, powerful, but ultimately benevolent if respected, catastrophic if angered. The scholars who studied the Lung described it in careful detail, as if they were naturalists cataloging a living species. It had the head of a camel, they said, with stag antlers rising from its brow. Its eyes were like those of a demon, large and unblinking, the color of amber or jade. Its ears were those of a cow, soft and alert. Its neck was long and serpentine, covered in scales the size of a man's hand, each one overlapping like the scales of a carp. Its body stretched for miles, coiling through the air as easily as through water. Beneath its chin, nestled in the soft flesh of its throat, was a pearl. This was the source of its power, a luminous sphere that glowed with inner light, warm to the touch, humming with energy. It was said that if you could take the pearl from a dragon's throat, you could control the weather itself. But no one ever had. The dragon guarded it jealously, and the pearl was sunk deep into its flesh, protected by layers of scale and muscle. The Lung did not live in caves. It lived in rivers, in lakes, in the hidden springs that fed the rice paddies. It rose into the sky during storms, its body winding through the clouds, and where it passed, rain fell. The farmers prayed to it during droughts, offering rice and incense, begging for water. And sometimes the dragon listened. In Japan, the dragon took a similar form, though the people there called it Ryu. It was thinner than its Chinese cousin, more serpentine, with fewer legs, sometimes two, sometimes none. It lived in the sea, in the deep places where the water turned from blue to black. Fishermen reported seeing its surface on calm days, its body breaking the water like a chain of islands, barnacles clinging to its ancient scales. The Ryu was a guardian. It protected the shores from typhoons, from tsunamis, from the wrath of the ocean itself. It did not hoard gold. It hoarded wisdom, and it shared that wisdom only with those who approached it with humility. In these lands, the dragon was not feared. It was revered. It was the shape of rain on dry earth, the sound of thunder rolling over mountains, the cool touch of river water on a hot day. It was the promise that the world, for all its dangers, had patterns, rhythms. That chaos could be transformed into order if one knew the right prayers, the right offerings. The great eye of the East opened slowly, and it was wise. It watched the rice grow. It watched the children play in the rivers. It watched the emperors rise and fall, and it did not interfere. It simply was, as it had always been, coiled in the water, breathing softly, its pearl glowing beneath its chin like a second heart. But in the West, the dragon became something else. It began in the deserts and forests of Europe, where the old serpent gods still lingered in folk memory. The people there had their own stories of great reptiles, creatures that lived in the dark places, in the caves and swamps and mountains where no one went. But as Christianity spread across the land, these creatures were reinterpreted. The serpent, after all, had been the enemy in the Garden of Eden. And so, the dragon, descendant of the primal serpents, became the devil's child. It grew wings, massive leathery wings like those of a bat, stretched over bone frames as thick as tree trunks. It grew legs, 4 of them, heavy and muscular, ending in claws that could rend stone. Its body became armored, covered in scales as thick as shields, overlapping in patterns that no sword could penetrate. It no longer lived in water. It lived in caves, deep in the mountains, in places where the sun never reached. And in those caves, it hoarded gold, jewels, crowns and scepters and chalices stolen from churches. The Western dragon was not a guardian. It was a thief, a miser, a creature of pure greed. It piled its treasure high, and it slept on top of it, the cold metal pressing against its belly, the gems catching the faint light of its own breath. For the Western dragon breathed fire, not the clean fire of a hearth, but something hotter, something sulfurous. Its breath smelled like burning stone, like the forge, like the hell the priests described in their sermons. When it exhaled, the air itself seemed to warp and shimmer, and anything caught in that exhalation, wood, cloth, flesh, burst into flame. The dragon became the trial, the obstacle, the thing that heroes were tested against. St. George, the knight in shining armor, rode out to face the dragon that terrorized a village. The creature was massive, its scales black as sin, its eyes glowing red. It had demanded sacrifices, livestock at first, then maidens, virgins bound to stakes and left weeping in the moonlight. George did not speak to the dragon. There was no negotiation, no diplomacy. He simply charged, lance lowered, and drove the point through the beast's throat. The dragon thrashed. It roared. Fire poured from its mouth, scorching the earth, turning the grass to ash. But George held firm, and when the creature finally fell, its blood stained the ground black. The villagers cheered. The maiden was saved. The dragon was evil, and evil had been vanquished. In the epic of Beowulf, the dragon was even more tragic. It had slept for 300 years, coiled around its hoard in a burial mound, content to simply exist. But a thief crept in, stole a single golden cup, and the dragon woke in fury. It flew out into the night, burning villages, destroying homes, killing anyone who got in its way. It was not evil by nature. It was simply a creature of wrath, wounded and venging. Beowulf, old and gray, went to face it. He brought warriors with him, but they fled when they saw the dragon's fire. Only one remained. Together, they slew the beast, but Beowulf was mortally wounded in the process. He died looking at the treasure, and his final words were bitter. "I have bought this hoard with my life," he said. "Look at it. Look at what I have won." But the treasure meant nothing. The dragon's hoard was cursed, and the gold would never bring happiness. The Western dragon was no longer a force of nature. It was a symbol of greed, of pride, of the devil himself. It was the thing that good men fought to prove their virtue. It was heavy, armored, slow, and ultimately doomed. Its eye opened, red and hateful, and then it closed forever. The maps changed. For centuries, cartographers had drawn dragons in the unexplored corners of the world, filling the blank spaces with serpents and sea monsters, and the words, "Here be dragons." But as explorers sailed further, as scientists cataloged species and measured coastlines, The dragons vanished from the maps. The world became known, measurable, finite. In the 1700s, men began digging in the earth and finding bones, massive bones, skulls the size of carriages, femurs as thick as tree trunks, teeth like daggers, serrated and sharp, still stained with ancient mineral deposits. At first, they did not know what to make of these discoveries. Some said they were the bones of giants, of the Nephilim mentioned in the Bible. Others said they were the remains of dragons, proof that the old stories had been true. But then came a new word: dinosaur, terrible lizard. The scientists studied the bones and reconstructed the creatures that had left them behind. They were reptiles, yes, but they were not dragons. They had no breath of fire. They had no intelligence. They were animals, long extinct, victims of some ancient catastrophe that had wiped them from the earth millions of years before humans ever walked upright. The dragon, it seemed, had been a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of fossils, of crocodiles, of snakes. The ancients had found these bones and imagined the creatures that had left them, and their imaginations had conjured dragons. The magic drained from the world like water from a cracked bowl. Children still heard the stories: St. George, Beowulf, the emperors, and their celestial lung. But they heard them as fairy tales, not as truth. Dragons were relegated to the past, to the realm of myth, to the same category as unicorns and phoenixes and all the other creatures that had never really existed. The great eye closed. The dragon slept, not in a cave, but in the pages of books, in the margins of old manuscripts, in the minds of those who still remembered what it had meant to fear the unknown. The world had been mapped. The darkness had been measured. And in that light, there was no room for dragons. But the dragon did not die. It changed again, as it always had, adapting to survive in a world that no longer believed in it. In 1937, a professor named J.R.R. Tolkien published a novel called The Hobbit. In it, there was a dragon named Smaug, vast, intelligent, cruel, and greedy. He lived in a mountain, hoarded gold, and spoke in riddles. He was a villain, yes, but he was also magnificent. He was the last of his kind, a relic of an ancient age, and when he died, something irreplaceable was lost. Readers loved him, not because he was evil, but because he was powerful, because he represented something that the modern world had forgotten: the sublime terror of the unknown, the beauty of something vast and ancient and utterly inhuman. The dragon began to return, not as a monster, but as a fantasy. In the 1970s, a game called Dungeons & Dragons was created, and it was filled with dragons of every color: red, blue, green, black, white, gold, silver, bronze. Each color had its own personality, its own alignment, its own breath weapon. Players could fight them, bargain with them, or even befriend them. The dragon became a character, not just a force. In the 1990s and 2000s, dragons filled movie screens. Dragonheart, where a dragon and a knight became allies. Reign of Fire, where dragons were apocalyptic predators. How to Train Your Dragon, where dragons were misunderstood animals that could be tamed with patience and love. The dragon was no longer a symbol of evil. It was a symbol of power. Power that humans desired. Power that they envied. Power that they wanted to possess or become. People began to identify with dragons. They drew them, wrote about them, dressed as them at conventions. They called themselves dragonkin, claimed spiritual connections to these ancient creatures. The dragon had become internalized, a part of the self, a way to express something that felt too large for ordinary words. And in a strange way, the dragon had returned to its origins. It was once again the shape of the unknown, not the unknown of the physical world, which had been mapped and measured, but the unknown of the self, the vast, chaotic, uncharted territory of identity, of desire, of the parts of us that do not fit into neat categories. The great eye opened once more, but this time it looked inward. The dragon sleeps now in the spaces between, in the flicker of imagination, in the moment before sleep when the mind wanders and the world becomes soft and strange. It is not in the rivers or the caves or the mountains. It is in us, coiled in the dark, breathing softly, waiting. It has always been waiting, and it will wait still, patient as stone, until the world forgets how to name it, and it becomes new again. The dragon does not end. It transforms. It adapts. It sleeps and wakes and sleeps again, its great eye opening and closing with the passage of ages. It is the serpent in the water, and the wings in the storm, and the horde in the dark. It is the fear we do not speak, and the power we wish we had. 10,000 years ago, it was chaos. 5,000 years ago, it was order. 1,000 years ago, it was evil. Today, it is beloved. Tomorrow, it will be something else. The scales shift. The breath cools. The treasure glimmers in the dark. And the dragon sleeps on, dreaming of the world as the world dreams of it. Forever.